Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Author, which is episode 19 of season 7 of Star Trek Voyager. I almost said The Next Generation, so used to covering The Next Generation, but of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by Toby the Targ. Oh no, I'm sorry, I mean as determined by my user polls. And the episode to win my Voyager user poll is the 7th season episode, Author. So Author is the episode in which the Doctor writes a holo novel, and Tom Paris tries it out, eager to give advice, however discovers that many of the characters look like and are modeled off of the senior staff of Voyager, and it portrays them in an extremely negative light, as the story is about very oppressive and dictatorial crew that is a bigot towards the Doctor because he's a hologram and oppresses him because of the fact. And so they are worried that if this gets released in the Alpha Quadrant, people will think that this is the Voyager crew and it will portray them in a negative light. The Doctor at first is very much against this and saying that it has nothing to do with the Voyager crew, despite the obvious fact that it does. But eventually, Tom Paris messes with this program, and then Neelix has a heart-to-heart with them, saying that he does love his novel, but maybe there's something he could do to consider his friend's feelings. So the Doctor then decides to change the holo novel around to make it completely different, so it doesn't resemble the Voyager crew anymore. However, when he asks his publisher to hold the novel and wait for his rewrite, the publisher goes and releases it anyway. And Admiral Paris and Barclay discover it, and they call Janeway saying there's a huge problem because this portrays Voyager in a negative light. And when the Doctor calls his publisher and complains that he told him not to release the novel, the publisher states that he has no rights because he's a piece of technology, and so that the publisher can do whatever he wants. So Janeway then has a trial, initiates a trial where Tuvok is the Doctor's lawyer, trying to say that the Doctor does have the right to decide whether or not he can release his novel. However, Janeway sees a greater issue here, as the judge and the publisher insist that the Doctor's not a real person, and in fact compare him to a replicator. And so Janeway makes it about that the Doctor is a real person, and does the crew do a lot of testimony to prove that he's a real person. And in the end, the judge doesn't rule that the Doctor is a real person, but he does rule that the Doctor is an artist under the law and thus can control what happens to his novel. So, there's two main reviews that I watched recently, well, after, just before recording my own review, that I am going to bring up. One is from my sister Alyssa, and she didn't do a full-on review of this. This was in her top 10 worst episodes of Voyager video that she did a couple years back. In fact, we did a live discussion right after she finished watching season 6 and 7 of Voyager, and I went back and watched that too, where we discussed, because we were picking our worst, our least favorite and our favorite episodes of the season, and she chose Author as her least favorite of season 7, and it was her number 5 least favorite of the entire show. And so one of the main things that she insisted was that the Doctor was being an egomaniac prick to the crew and not considering the crew's feelings at all. And in fact, she complained that season 7 ruined the Doctor overall by turning him into a giant egotistical asshole, if I believe her argument correctly. And then on the other spectrum, I just watched a review by Steve Shives, who reviewed the episode Arthur. Now, Steve Shives is a great YouTube channel. I love some of his videos are, I think, some of the best videos on YouTube. Always love his channel. I don't always agree with him, but I really love his channel. And he had almost the exact opposite take on this episode, saying that the Voyager crew were being assholes to the Doctor because the asshole sorry, Freudian slip there. The Doctor felt repressed, and the Voyager crews were more worried about their feelings and what it would say about them, rather than paying attention to the fact that the Doctor felt repressed and was trying to bring that to light, and also pointing to the fact how the crew often treats him like a piece of technology and treats him like assholes and don't consider his feelings, and they only get involved to save him when the Doctor is trying to save their reputations. So that's one extreme is my sister, and the other is Steve Shives. So if I were to say my opinion is in somewhere in the middle, that would not be entirely accurate. I'm sorry, but I side a lot more with my sister on this one. A lot more. Now, that's not to say I agree with her entirely. Like, for example, I wouldn't put this in my top 10 worst episodes of Voyager. In fact, I think I did a top 30 worst of Voyager, and this did not make my list. And I kind of like the Doctor better than she does. I think that's fair to say. Because we were talking, and when we discussed season 6, we were talking about the episode Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy, which is a fan favorite comedy episode, which I love, and I think that's one of the best comedy episodes in the Star Trek franchise. She did not like it very much, and I believe she cited the fact that she doesn't like the Doctor and doesn't think he's funny. Well, I do, and I thought that there were parts of this episode that were funny, but when I saw Steve Shives' review, and I usually don't talk about other people's reviews, but I was like, there's no way I can talk about this episode without bringing up Steve Shives' review. Because when I saw his review, like, my mouth just flung open. Like, I was slack-jawed in shock when he was going on about how much assholes the crew were, and talking about how the crew, Janeway was just being a selfish prick, and they didn't give a shit about the Doctor's feelings. Because I said more with my sister on this. I'm sorry, that the Doctor is clearly the one being the asshole here, and not the Voyager crew. In fact, like, I'm just in awe. I'm just in awe of what Steve Shives was saying. I'm just still in shock from it that he would, I'm sorry, but be objectively wrong. Like, I think okay, so he has semblance of a point, I guess, but he kind of ignores the fact that, first of all, when Janeway said to him, do you feel repressed? Do you feel oppressed, Doctor? Because the novel seems like it's about someone who feels repressed. And do you? When she said that, it sounded like he ascribed malicious intention to that question. But I think it's very clear that she was genuinely concerned for him, and she considered his feelings and was outright, please let me know if you feel oppressed, because we really don't want you to feel that way. And he was like, oh, no, that's not how I feel. I just, wanted to, this is more for my brethren in the Alpha Quadrant who are being oppressed. And here's the thing, so the Doctor is being a prick, by making this holoprogram where the characters act way over the top. And by the way, I don't think it's a particularly good novel. Like, let's leave aside the fact that they're obviously the Voyager crew. Let's say, pretend that the revisionist novel is pretty much the same, except that they don't resemble the Voyager crew at all, which is what his ultimate goal was. We didn't get to see that on screen, but let's assume that's the case. It would still be a bad novel because it's too over the top. It's too sort of, I'm being an evil asshole. And I think, and that's something I talk about a lot when Star Trek does this, or other shows do this, when they do the mustache twirly villain, it's not very good. And it actually has a better commentary and stronger, because he wants to put out a message for holographic rights, which is a noble cause. But this is totally the wrong way to do it. So, because it portrays them as like over the top evil dictatorships. It kind of reminds me of the episode Living Witness, where we saw the Voyager crew recreated from historians 900 years in the future, not going off of bits and pieces of information and getting the Voyager crew totally wrong and portraying them as, psychopathic killers, which they're clearly not. And here, the Doctor does the same thing. Now, again, let's forget about the Voyager crew aspect of it. It's supposed to take place on a Starfleet vessel. It's unbelievable that the captain of the vessel would, when the holographic doctor says, I need to triage. You want me to treat this one patient because he's your navigator, but his life is not in danger. This other guy's going to die unless I treat him. So the captain pulls out a phaser and shoots and kills the patient, being, well, there you go. You no longer have to worry about him dying. So now you can go treat my helmsman. Mustache twirling. That's bad. Unless, if you do it under a certain circumstance, like if it was like the mirror universe or something, or if it was supposed to be, even the mirror universe, though, can be very two-dimensional. But if it was supposed to be like a really oppressive dictatorship society that mistreats everyone, then perhaps you could get away with this kind of writing. But portraying it in the Federation, especially on the Starfleet ship, it is bad writing. It rings untrue. So, and the fact that they portrayed the he used the images of the Voyager crew and had their names sound so similar, just made them different aliens or gave them mustaches or whatever. That is hugely insulting to the Voyager crew. And I'm sorry, Mr. Shaz, but you're totally wrong on this one. The Doctor is being an egotistical prick and insensitive to his friend's feelings on this. Now, as far as the crew oppressing the Doctor in the past, I think perhaps in the very, very early days of Voyager, they were a bit insensitive to him. But to be fair, it took a while before the Doctor fully became sentient as well. And Cass really helped that along. She really pushed for seeing the Doctor as a human being, and Janeway bought into it almost right away. There were a few examples in the earlier seasons where she would chafe on some things, but for the most part, she really grew to appreciate him as an individual and encourage his individualism and encourage his rights and spoke out for his rights and stood up for him on many occasions. Now, Steve Shives brings up the episode Latent Image from season 5 as an example of Janeway oppressing the Doctor because she erases his memory, and I think that is misleading. That is a misleading conclusion to take from that episode, because in that episode, she did take away memories from him against his will, and tried to hide it from him, so lying to him when he was discovering the truth, and then went and altered his program again, but he caught her red-handed. So yes, these would on the surface appear to be very negative things, and that she was just treating him as a piece of technology, but you're leaving out the fact that the reason why she was doing this is because his program got stuck in a feedback loop and he was unable to operate, and so she was doing this for his benefit, because he was stuck in a feedback loop and he was inoperable and he couldn't function, he couldn't live. He was essentially he was, I guess I would say, like, depressed or suicidal or just mentally ill, I suppose. And so she was doing this, honestly, if we're being honest, part of it is because they need a doctor. They don't really have a good doctor. But other part, she was doing it for his own benefit, so to make him feel better. In fact, when she told him what had really happened, the thing that she erased from his memory, he got stuck in that same loop again, and he agreed with her. He's like, "You're absolutely right for doing this. You're gonna want to erase my program? I'll do it for you. Here, blah 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 blah." And he conveniently left out the part of that episode where Janeway realized that just simply altering his program was not the right thing to do, or the right way to go. That the best way to go about it would be to actually sit with him and be with him and be a friend and walk him through it. And so she just sat with him night and day. Sat there all day, gave up all of her free time just to be with her friend, to help him through his difficult time, which is the correct way of dealing with someone who's going through a tough time or depression or, crisis of faith. And so she helped him work through just like she would for any other sentient humanoid being. She sat with him and let him work through his difficulty. And so that's quite misleading to lead out that part of the episode, because if anything, that episode is proof of how much Janeway nurtures the Doctor and cares for the Doctor and sees the Doctor as a person and has fought for the Doctor's right to be a person. But then on the other hand, you could bring up many other episodes to show that the Doctor is being self-centered, egotistical, and insensitive to his crewmates' feelings. One example would be Virtuoso, where his ego got so inflated because he thought he was going to become an opera star that he was willing to just leave Voyager and just leave his ship and not give a shit about all the friends he was losing because he wanted to be a big rock star. Or what else is there? Oh yeah, or the episode that's brought up in this episode, the Flesh and Blood episode, where he was willing to disregard his Voyager friends and be like, fuck them, and go off with all these psychopathic holograms, which he did end up regretting when he realized how psychopathic those holograms were, and realized what a huge mistake that he made by betraying his true family. Or the episode my sister brought up, which actually comes up after this one, and she did mention that, Renaissance Man, where he's going around saying flat out to Janeway, "I'm more superior than you. I'm much better." Sorry, that is an egotistic. So sorry. There is a hell of a lot more evidence to show that the Doctor is an egotistical prick, and that his crew do nothing but support him and look after him. And his way of thanking for all of their support is to portray them as if they are the most repressive, evil dictatorship that repressed him in this holodeck program. Now, his whole thing about, those characters aren't you, is beyond stupid. And we have some people, I think some Patreon supporters, the comments I'm going to read later, who point out that this is really obtuse as the Doctor. This is bad writing for the Doctor, because the Doctor would not be this stupid to not realize how fucking insensitive that he's being to his good friends that have supported him so much through the years. And I do kind of agree with that. I agree that this episode, the way it's written, is too over the top, and the Doctor is being too insensitive, which again is why I was just so awestruck by Steve Shive's interpretation of this episode. But hey, people think what they want to think, because they made the Doctor the most selfish, egotistical, and insensitive ass in this episode, to an absurd degree that I think does not even fit with his character. So that's where I stand on that. So now I get, again, it makes sense that he would want to make a program sort of sticking up for holographic rights. But I feel like this whole thing is a trope. So I just watched the Delta Flyers podcast on this episode where Robert Picardo guest starred on that, and he talked about how this episode came about was that Robert Picardo, the actor, pitched a book to write for, I think Simon Schuster, who does all the Star Trek books, to write the holograms guide to whatever, where it was it was all about the holograms or the Doctor's perspective. So he wrote it in character as the Doctor, as all about the Doctor's perspective of how to deal with Starfleet and everything like that. And so apparently he told Brennan Braga about it, and Brennan Braga was like, "Oh, really?" and decided to write this episode in response. That kind of reminds me of the Seinfeld episode, where there's this Seinfeld episode in the later seasons where Kramer, he ghost wrote a book. There was this guy that Elaine used to be Elaine's boss, and he wrote this book about himself. It was supposed to be a biography, but it wasn't really his life. It was Kramer's life. So he did this bus tours about, I'm the real, I can't remember the dude's name, but the real blah, 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 where he'd do a bus tour around New York to go to all the places in the book, and it kind of fell apart. And that episode was based off of real events, because the character of Kramer is based on a real person named Kramer, and that Kramer does a bus tour in New York saying the real Kramer from Seinfeld. And so they were kind of making fun of that, or got inspired for that. And so it sounds like a very similar concept here, where Robert Picardo wrote a book about how, being a bit egotistical about how awesome it is to be a hologram. And so they made, what if the Doctor wrote a holonovel about that? And I do say, I think that the idea is kind of cliche. I do feel like a lot of shows and movies have done this idea before, where someone writes a book or a movie or something, and the characters in that book resemble his friends, and his friends get offended because they're like, how could you betray me like this? I feel like that is something we've seen a lot before, and I don't think that this version really adds anything to that. Not really. Yeah, so the mobile emitter being a huge backpack that's really heavy to wear, and B'Elanna, when she pointed out, it's like, yeah, what the hell's the deal with that? And he was like, oh, the mobile emitter is very heavy, and I wanted to use a metaphor for it being heavy so people watching that would feel the weight. And Janeway rightfully points out that the mobile emitter actually frees him. It's a freeing thing because he'd be stuck in sickbay, other words, which is backed up by several previous episodes of Voyager where he goes fucking insane when he doesn't have his mobile emitter. I was just did a live stream on the episode Drone where he was hounding B'Elanna, even like going, doing a video conference in the shower while she was naked and bothering her because to hurry up and fix the mobile emitter. And then there was the episode concerning flights when his mobile emitter got stolen and he was again being a very huge prick and freaking out and blah blah blah. So Janeway's with 1000% correct by rightfully pointing out that by his own standards, by the way, the mobile emitter is freeing. It's a positive thing. So it seems, but he points out, it's like, well, it seems like a badge. It sets me apart from everyone else because I always have to wear it wherever I go, and it kind of alienates me from people. And I'm not going to say that's invalid. I would say that's inconsistent with the Doctor and that he's being a bit obtuse to the fact that it does give him freedom and that he would fucking hate life without it. But okay, fine, I can see that part of it, that it does sort of make him feel different. But I think Janeway was totally in the right of pointing out that it's that it actually is freeing for him by his own admission. But anywho, I think Janeway and the crew were being so nice to him. They were all going out of their way, like especially when he was on trial, to like give their testimonies and stick up for the Doctor. I don't understand how anyone can say the crew was being an asshole when they went out of their way to fucking stick up for him. And don't say, sorry, what Steve Shives said about, they're just doing it because they're worried about their own reputation. No. There were several outs in this episode that Tuvok brought up that would have, there were several directions they could have gone to get rid of that holonovel so the reputations would be safe, no one else would see that holonovel. There were several directions Tuvok pointed out that would have been more of a sure thing, and that definitely a quicker path to getting rid of that holonovel, and Janeway said no. She said, I will not take that path because it is admitting that the Doctor is not a person, and the Doctor is a person, god damn it. So I'm sorry, Steve Shafts is objectively wrong. Just flat objectively wrong. They stick up for the Doctor's right in this very episode. It's not about, they proved that it's not about simply saving their reputations, because if it was, they could have done that. But it was about proving that the Doctor was a real person. So, anyway, I do love Steve Shive's channel. I just have to make that very clear. I love his channel, and I'd recommend anyone go watch it. But yeah, that's definitely, I don't know, I just had to address it. But anyway, so I gotta talk about the scene where Tom Paris hijacks his novel, because this is by far the funniest part of the whole episode. This is one of the funniest scenes in the whole show, I will say, and it had me, cracking up laughing when the Doctor goes to, the Doctor refuses to alter his program at first, and he was like, well, I don't, he even yells in Tom Paris's face and says, if you look past your ego, blah blah, and he's totally in the wrong. He was such a dick in that scene. But anyway, so he goes to revise his holonovel after having that conversation where he refused to consider his friend's feelings like a dick and yelled in Tom Paris's face like a dick. And then he went to revise his holonovel and found that Tom Paris had hijacked. Okay, actually, no, I got that wrong. I got to correct myself. He yelled in Tom Paris's face after Tom fucked with this holonovel. So I'll correct my mistake right there. But he was still being a dick by not considering their feelings. But anyway, so he goes to work on the holonovel, and Tom Paris had hijacked it, and this scene was so hilarious, where Tom was being like the doctor and dressed in that smoking jacket, and being like, "Oh, you made an excellent choice," and the doctor's like, "What's going on?" And it's like, "You are going, I think." In the Doctor's holonovel, he called the ship the Vortex, and then Tom Paris's hijacked version, it was the Voyager, which I love. And he was like, "You have to play the medical assistant to an egotistical doctor. You have to suffer through his self-important," and then it has like this version of the doctor with like a bad comb over, and he was just being ridiculous. Where, 7 of 9 version, it was like 2 of 3. He's like, "They're triplets, and he goes up and like starts scanning. Oh yeah, it's like scanning like he doesn't give a shit, and saying, it's so hilarious when 2 of 3 or whatever is like, "My arm hurts," or something like, "It hurts when I lift my arm like that," and he's like, "Well, don't lift your arm like that," and just slaps her in the arm that hurts. It's like, "Oh, get it," and she's like, "Ow," and he's like, "Oh, don't be a baby," and then like roofies her, gives her this Klingon aphrodisiac, and starts like being all creepy as fuck behind her. I'm sorry, that was hilarious, and Robert Picardo played that scene so fucking well. Oh god, that was hilarious. And there were other parts of the Doctor's holonovel that I found a bit funny as well, like Kim being a hypochondriac, or 3 of 8. And of course, in the Doctor's version, 3 of 8, 7 of 9 stand-in was the one good character who actually stood up for the Doctor, which again really showed his bias, and it really was like being like, yeah, 7 of 9 is the only good person I like, the rest of y'all suck. I mean, that would be, if I was Tom Paris or Harry Kim or Janeway, that would be my takeaway from watching his novel. I think y'all suck, you're dickheads, but 7 of 9's awesome. Honestly, and I think the Doctor is, again, uncharacteristically being obtuse by not realizing that they would see it that way. But anyway, I love the Tom Paris sort of rewriting, and that's when the Doctor comes in, gets in his face, and yells directly in his face. And even then, he is being stubborn and refusing to change his program. It wasn't until Neelix had a talk with him. Now, I did like this scene. I did think this was a good scene where Neelix came in and it was like, "Actually, I loved your holonovel. I thought it was riveting." And the Doctor's like, "Really?" And Neelix eventually, he says this, Talaxian saying is like, "When the road splits in two, take the third path." Now, I think he said these weird Talaxian sayings at least one other time. I don't know how many. It wasn't very often, but I know this wasn't the first time he did. And I love that they make up their metaphors that don't exist and say it's Talaxian, rather than taking an Earth metaphor and saying it's Klingon. Like, it's very... Revenge is the dish best served cold. It's not a Klingon saying. But anyway... But they kind of make up their own, and they're always like, don't really make much sense. This one kind of makes sense, but I can't remember what the other one he said before. It made no sense. It's like, what? It's always, when he brings up the metaphor too, the person he's talking to is always like, what? But anyway, so Neelix suggests that he keep his program essentially the same, but just change the characters so they don't resemble the Voyager crew, which is... I don't know why Neelix needed to be the one to point this out. The Doctor should have realized this instantly, and should have realized that if he wants to tell this important story about holographic rights, maybe just not make your friends look like dicks. I just common decency. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, but Neelix. I did like the scene though. I liked that Neelix was the one who wasn't being upset with the Doctor and was able to sort of reason with him. And I think sometimes Neelix really works. But anyway, so this is the point in the episode where it completely changes over from a very lighthearted comedic episode with the Doctor being a total prick and and the crew having fun in the holodeck to a flat out rip off of The Measure of a Man. Instantly change is so jarring actually that I think it flat out makes it a bad episode. Sorry to say, I've heard other people who like this episode saying, "Oh, I like how when Voyager starts in one thing and goes to another." I hate that. I fucking hate it. Pick your lane and stay in that goddamn lane. You can't do. And in fact, I think it was Robert Picardo actually, the episode he brought up to point out to another example where this happened was Tuvix. And God damn it. If you know anything about me, you know that I'm not a fan of that episode. In fact, I put Tuvix on my top 5 worst. I didn't put Arthur, but I definitely put Tuvix of Voyager. But anyway, so I hate it when they do that. But speaking of Tuvix, sorry, I have to go into a tangent now. Because I heard someone else point out the fact that there was a line in the episode where the Doctor was talking to Janeway after she confronted him about his holonovel, and he was like, "Oh, Captain Jenkins is nothing like you. You've never murdered one of my patients that I recall." And this reviewer said, "Oh, actually she did. Tuvix. Do they just forget about Tuvix?" Well, here's the thing. Tuvix was not fucking murdered. I'm sorry, this is not... People don't want to admit this. They don't want to see the truth, and they want to delude themselves. But Tuvix was Tuvok and Neelix, and they didn't murder him. They uncombined them so that Tuvok and Neelix would live. Sorry, I'm using their fucking terminology, which I shouldn't do. So Tuvix was always just a different version of Tuvok and Neelix, but combined into one rather than being separated. So Tuvix was always Tuvok and Neelix, but in one person. So what they did is they undid the freak accident that combined Tuvok and Neelix, and so that they were no longer one person, that they were separate people again. So they restored Tuvok and Neelix to their original state of being. They didn't kill Tuvix, because Tuvix was always Tuvok and Neelix, but combined into one person. And so Tuvix was always Tuvok and Neelix. There was no Tuvix. It's Tuvok and Neelix. They just happen to be one person. And that's not their correct or their original state of being. Their original state of being is being two separate people, and so she restored Tuvok and Neelix to their original being. She didn't kill anyone. If she did, where's Tuvik's body? Where's alright, you say, oh, if you phaser someone, you have ashes and DNA. Okay, so where is Tuvik's DNA? Where's his cells? Where's his makeup? In Tuvok and Neelix, because he was always fucking Tuvok and Neelix. So no! Janeway did not murder anyone. Anyway, sorry. I had to throw that out of the way. Fuck, I hate that episode. Anyway, sorry. Where was I? Well, I was talking about, the episode starting out one thing and turning into a ripoff of Measure of a Man. And just like Tuvix, bringing that up yet again, that had a comedic premise, but all of a sudden turned into serious melodrama, which is also why it fucking sucks. And they kind of do the same thing here, although they don't do it so ridiculous and over the top with Tuvix going around screaming, "I want to live!" That was so comically bad. How can people think that's good? It's laughably bad. I'm sorry. I said I wouldn't talk about that episode anymore. So this episode isn't as bad as that, is my point. It doesn't do anything as fucking ridiculous as that, which is why this isn't in my top 5 worst than Tuvix is. But it's a cheap knockoff of the Measure of a Man. It's doing the same thing, but worse, because it doesn't even start till there's 20 minutes left in the episode, and at first the episode was a silly comedy where the doctor's being a prick. Now all of a sudden they want to do Measure of a Man, and they do it so poorly. Now, to be fair, if they did an episode that from the start was a trial about the doctor's rights, I might have bought it. It still would have seemed too much like the Measure of a Man, but at least it would have worked, whereas I think turning this silly comedy farce into a Measure of a Man ripoff sucks. It's just bad writing. It's I can't take it seriously at all. And here's the other thing. Speaking of the Measure of a Man, they should have brought up in the episode, in the trial, the events of the Measure of a Man, because it sets precedent. So anyone who knows about, which I'm not pretending I know anything about being a lawyer or the law. I know nothing. I watch YouTube videos. I'm not a lawyer. But anyone who knows the bare minimum, which is what I know, of the law and how lawyers operate, is they always go off of precedent. They cite previous court cases to back up their previous rulings, particularly of judges in the past, to back up their case, which is exactly what they should have done here, because the doctor is an AI, which is what Data is. Data is also an AI, and they had officially ruled that Data is sentient. And that was proven, and it became an accepted part of Federation society. Well, until we get to Picard era, but we're not going to talk about that. But at this point in the stage, the androids were considered sentient. They were considered legal persons. They were not property. They were sentient beings and deserved the same rights as any other sentient being. And androids are AI. Holograms are also AI. Now, I'm not saying this would be an airtight case. I'm sure there's a good lawyer could try to attack that position and be like, by the way, there's no prosecuting lawyer in this. They just have, it's the judge who's asking all the questions, and the publisher is just sitting there being, giving his testimony or whatever. Why doesn't he have a lawyer? But anyway, let's start that out. That they could attack the position that bringing up Data, but it's still a strong case. It's still a tactic worth going to be like, especially if they want to prove that the doctor's a person, when the guy said flat out, compared the doctor to a replicator, which is almost the same thing Maddox did to Data. Well, he compared it to the ship's computer. But anyway, Tuvok definitely should have said, well, no, actually, it's been proven that AI are sentient. And the doctor, as we will prove with his whole, the way he's been behaving and whatever, is sentient. So, I think they actually should have won this case easily. I'm sorry. I think that, I really do. I think that ruling that, I'm going to rule that the doctor's an artist, but he's not actually a person. I'm not ready to rule that. But to be fair, it's murky with holograms, because there are a lot of holograms who are not sentient. Not every hologram is sentient. And that's a murky area. Now, they could prove that the doctor is, and they could prove that other certain holograms are, But most of the, like, if you watch an episode of TNG and they go on the holodeck and they, hang out with, like, gangsters or whatever, those aren't really sentient beings. They're just programmed responses. Now, who's to say, like, they made a big deal out of Moriarty, who became sentient, because that's not normal for a hologram to be sentient. And no one seemed to give a fuck that, Vic Fontaine was sentient. They just still, it was part of his program that there would be these gangsters that could kill him and wipe him out just to make it more fun, which is not a good way to treat a fucking sentient being. But anyway, fuck that episode. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, so it is a bit murky, the whole issue of holographic rights, and so that's why I think this would legitimately be a good topic to explore, but not in the last 20 minutes of a fucking silly comedy episode. And they're not asking the right questions. They're gonna compare it to data, say, hey, there's already been ruled that AI are sentient, but then, is the Doctor AI? And if he is AI, are all holograms AI? If they're not all AI, how do we tell the difference between the ones that are and the ones that aren't? That would actually be an interesting thing to explore, which the show never actually really fucking touched on. It kind of just assumed that all holograms were sentient, which is not consistent with how holograms were portrayed in earlier Star Trek. Even in the episode Flesh and Blood, they kind of touched on this when those evil holograms, like, attacked the ship and killed the people in order to free these holograms, but the holograms just turned out to be very simple programs that definitely were not sentient. So that's the only time Voyager really touched on it, but I feel like they should have touched on it a hell of a lot more, and I think that would have been an interesting episode. This is not, unfortunately. Now, before I finish up, though, there's a couple scenes with crew sprinkled throughout the episode of crew members talking to their family, which I liked. I think they were a nice touch, where, Harry Kim was talking to his parents, and he was, like, obsessed with wanting to talk to them. But what was better was the scene with B'Elanna Torres, like, mending fences with their father, which touches on another episode when they showed flashbacks of how he abandoned her and neglected her, and he calls her and saying, look, I know I can't make up for 20 years of absence and one phone call, but I would like to get to know you better. And her response is, I'll write you. It's touching. I'm almost tearing up just talking about it. It was a really touching scene. And also, when 7 of 9 is encouraged by Harry Kim to contact a relative of her, and she finds an aunt that's still alive and contacts her, and their conversation was really a huge character. It was a nice character, rare good character moment for 7 of 9 season 7. Usually season 7 like destroyed her character and never portrayed her very well, but this was a rare moment of a really touching, really strong character moment for her. So I did like those aspects of the episode. Anyway, I would now like to thank my patrons for supporting me on Patreon. It is very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'm very thankful for everyone's support. So I will give a shout out as soon as I bring up my list. I'm always a bit slow on this one. Anyway, give a shout out to Antarius, Tatson, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Michelosio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few patron comments for this episode, which I have to go back to now because usually I have two windows open for both of these, but I didn't have the foresight to do that this time. So now I got to bring it up again. Okay, here we go. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I just checked who wrote this episode, and Brennan Braga failed again. I'm not sure Was it Brennan Braga or the other two who wrote the teleplays, Sussman and Strong? There is no way the Doctor would write this piece of shit during season 7. Maybe he would have in seasons 1 or 2. This is how to almost destroy a character with one episode. The last 10 minutes saves this episode for me. I love the scene with 7 of 9 talking to her granny. It was her aunt. Just correction there. Even Harry Kim's mother asked why he hasn't been promoted yet. Yes, that's a very good point. My rating is 4 terrible stories that everybody loves the Doctor again. Maybe Tuvok gave everyone a mind meld so they forget the first 2 acts of this episode. Out of 10. Alright, so next comment is from Ricky, who says, this episode is averagely good in my opinion. I would never say that this episode is one of the worst episodes of the show or even in the season. However, there are a lot of logical flaws in this episode where it seems like there were 2 scripts combined into one. The first part of the episode was actually quite hilarious and I was busting out laughing, especially at the scene where Tom Paris tunes the Doctor's program where he's being a heartless doctor and making fun of 7 of 9's condition. But the second part of the episode is where I have a huge issue. It all of a sudden becomes a Measure of a Man ripoff for no reason. I mean, come on. You have the first 3 acts as a comedy and then all of a sudden becomes a dark trial episode. I didn't buy it. I couldn't take it seriously, so I still don't think this is a horrible episode, but it is a flawed one. So my rating is a 5 out of 10. Yeah, excellent points. As per usual, Ricky, we are on the same page. So, last comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, I always get this episode mixed up with Virtuoso, which I like a lot more. Bugger the fact that this is a ripoff of Measure of a Man. This episode annoys me because it is all about the Doctor's ego. Again. But I do enjoy some of the special effects, so I'm giving this episode 5 smoking jackets out of 10. But I'm being very generous. So, yeah, that's also a very good point. The Doctor's ego, especially season 7. Always plays to the Doctor's ego. You know, and the other thing I would point out that the part where Jenkins, kills the patient so that the Doctor would operate on her helmsman because she thinks the helmsman's more important, reminded me of Critical Care, which is a much better episode. Anyway. So my rating for Arthur out of 10 is going to be a 4 poor. I almost went 5 with this one, but the more I think about it, the more I think it deserves a 4. I don't think it's, again, so this is where I differ from my sister who clearly would give it a 1 as she had it in their top 5 worst of the whole show. I don't think it's that bad because there are parts of it that I like, such as I think the scene with Tom Paris doing the holo program with the Doctor is fucking hilarious. I think it's one of the funniest scenes in the whole show. And some of the other parts of the Doctor's thing was funny. And I love the stuff with the other crew members talking to their family, particularly the moment with 7 of 9. That was, and the moment with Torres, like they were both like really touching. And there were some good aspects, again, to like Janeway sticking up for the Doctor and being like, no, you know, we could argue that he's not a person, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick up and do the harder fight of making sure, because this isn't about us, which is why Steve Sheffield is wrong. This isn't about us and our reputation. It's about the Doctor. Something's more on the line here, and we need to prove that the Doctor's a person. So I like that aspect of it. But the Doctor was being an egotistical prick throughout most of the episode to an absurd degree that was, I would say, inconsistent with his character, so it's bad writing. And they had this silly over-the-top comedy, and last 20 minutes of the episode, they turned it into just a cheap knockoff of Measure of a Man. So, yeah, this is a bad episode overall. So that is it for my review of Author. I almost said Measure of a Man. Oh, God, yeah. Anyway, so coming up next on my channel, we will get to the last of my poll winners with the Enterprise poll winner, Civilization. My review for that will be coming out on Saturday, and then Monday I'll be doing a video essay on the myth of fan entitlement and why it's dangerous. Fan entitlement is not really a thing, but I'll talk about that more in my video essay. On Wednesday, I'll be over on Patreon to do a revisited for family. That's for my Patreon supporters, where I revisit my already existing review for the TNG episode Family. And then on Thursday, we're finally back on my main channel, back on track, done all the poll winners, back to Next Generation, going in order again, back to season 4, starting with the episode Brothers, which will come out Thursday. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I do many more Star Trek videos and many other shows. So be sure to subscribe, and thanks a lot for watching.